but
So
he's getting
we-
shot.
Right?
He has kids in his class that closed last week too.
We will call the meeting to order, and we'll start with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And roll call.
Say last name or
Whatever you
I
want.
haven't been here in a while. Dr. Bardo.
Here.
Dr. Deep.
Here.
Wayne Gagnon.
There.
Jill McNelson.
Here.
Andy Mary.
Here.
Mary Neufeld.
Here.
Danny Pyatt.
Here.
J.D. Schreier.
Here.
Angel Zimmerman. Here.
Okay, we will go on to public comment. Patrick, could you bring that up for us, please? Okay, we will start with Carol Bartle.
Start off, I do not like standing in front of people talking, so this will be very short and sweet. And basically, I just want to make a public statement that I am submitting to the school district public record request. I would like to see the total funds received and the expenditures of the ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 funds. I'm sure most of the board probably know what those are, but I am going to describe them just so the people that are listening will know, because I had to do some research on this. ESSER 1 is the CARES Act. That's the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security. That I could not find a total on. The ESSER 2 is the CRRSA Act, which is the COVID Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations. For that, from what I found, the district received $2,173,213. The ESSER 3 is the American Rescue Plan Act. For that, did receive or will be receiving $4,880,432. There was a total then of $7,053,651. And what I'm requesting is that we have the actual totals and that were allotted to us, and specifically how these funds have been used. I would like copies of all the proposals, requests made by this district to the state and federal agencies, and what were the requirements to our district to qualify for these funds. For example, was there documentation of masking, contact tracing, quarantine, any other CDC protocol procedures, and were these submitted, and who was the one gathering this information? I'm requesting to receive this information within 7 work days, which would make it January 26th of this year. Thank you very much.
And you're submitting that all in writing, Carol?
Yes,
Thank
every
you.
bit of it. So Julie, you would like that then? Sure, because and there's an addendum on the back describing all that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And next is Amy Alfonso.
Where do I go? Just right here?
Yeah, it's right there, and you can use the mic.
I feel like I have a pretty good voice. Can you hear me?
I think for the benefit of the people in the back, I'd ask you to use the mic.
I am fine with that. Okay, good? Yeah. So your agenda topic for tonight is COVID update and possible action. In my way of thinking, there's a trust issue here. The anti-COVID community and parents of the student bodies you are influencing do not trust this school board, I think, by and large. Based on the small number of meetings I've attended, that has been the overwhelming takeaway for me. And I'm pretty instinctual, empathic. I pick up on things very fast. You're also continuing to instill fear in our community with your vague wording. I believe this is also by design. Omicron is a big deal, but it's a head cold at this point. I feel like we all should know that if you're paying attention to actual news that is true. We are in the endemic phase. So these face masks are funny to me. I mean, I'm sorry to offend you potentially, but substitute teachers may be a problem. So I'm going off on a kind of a curve here. Finding them. I'm guessing that might be your topic tonight. Here, I'm going to get into it a little bit more. But I'm only guessing that might be the problem, since the school board wasn't completely forthcoming with this emergency agenda item. COVID update and possible action. Disgusting to me. Tonight's agenda item is too vague for direct and specific public comment. I believe that is by design and purpose. What are the bullet points of a specific or possible action? You must have known when you provided the agenda. You did. You must have known. We can't prepare our own comments adequately if we don't know the specifics of the topic. Had you chosen to zero in on the actual point of tonight's meeting on the agenda itself, better progress could have been made. Instead, anyone speaking in the public comment portion can only guess at what the ultimate point might be, essentially shooting darts at public possibilities of what you're going to present us with. This is unacceptable, honestly, in my opinion, and dishonest. Personally, I find myself exhausted by the word transparent. So sick of it. Put that in quotes, transparent. Because it is too often used by the person who's actually lying about what they're claiming to be transparent about. But I also find myself wanting to hear the word transparent by this school board if they are truly willing to be that. I'm an Antigo High School graduate, 1988. I lived in Antigo my whole life until an adult when I moved away. I'm back now and I'm astounded at the decay in our public education system. We need to do better, and the board needs to let the community and our parents have a better say in their children's education that actually results in education our founding fathers envisioned. I urge you to look at Virginia's new state governor, Glenn Youngkin, if you don't know his name, and his recent executive orders. That's a good place to start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Jennifer Creston.
Hi, I'm going to be talking about COVID and your guys' emergency meeting that isn't really an emergency. It's about Omicron. Again, just like what she said, it's really hard to come up here and talk when we don't know exactly what you're going to talk about and what you're going to decide and what your plan is moving forward. So it's just kind of a guess on what the rumors on the street are. Rumors on the street are that you're talking about closing down our schools again, like you did in 2020. Or I'm assuming, I thought you were just going to try to slap masks back on our kids. And then I started hearing the rumors about the closing down the schools, which would be even 100 times worse. But I don't know exactly what your thought is moving forward. But if it's about the Omicron cases and positive cases, you are literally having an emergency meeting and thinking about closing down our schools and putting masks back on our kids because there's 3,500 pediatrics hospitalized throughout our entire nation. Like, really? That's all things? That's not COVID cases. That is total pediatrics in our nation, 3,500. And if you're going off of what the Supreme Court Justice said, like throughout last week, about 100,000 cases of pediatrics, that was completely false, 100% false. She lied through her teeth. That was not true. The CDC even came forward and said she lied and that it was not true, that the true case number is 3,500 pediatrics hospitalized in our entire nation out of millions and millions and millions of pediatrics in our nation. Omicron is a godsend. It is a good thing. This is going to end the pandemic. It is really, really, really contagious, which is not good, but it is very, very mild. It is basically a cold. Our children have gotten colds for hundreds and thousands of years. Like, that's not nothing to be worried about. Since my kids were babies, they got colds. You know what I keep in my house? Cold medicine, because I expect it. I know they're going to get a cold, and there's nothing you guys can do about it. There's nothing any parent can do about it. If you let your kids leave the home, they're going to get sick, but they're not going to be hospitalized. I mean, did you guys even listen to the lady from South Africa who found Omicron, the variant? If you listen to her speech when she announced it, that she found it, she said it was very mild. She said it was basically a cold. And yet, what did our fake news media do? Blast it all over the news, scare the living crap out of the United States public. Because let's make it look like it's going to be killing all of us. Let's put masks back on our kids. The mask ain't going to work. The CDC announced it last week that cloth masks don't work. So if you're going to throw masks back on our kids, well, then you're not listening to the CDC, which you've been saying that we have to listen to the CDC. We have to do what the CDC says. Well, the CDC said last week cloth masks don't work. That it's through the air, and it's going to get through any little opening that there is, which cloth masks have, so they don't work. So if you're going to put masks back on our kids, you're not listening to the CDC. If you're going to shut down our schools because of Omicron, well, then you're not listening to science or statistics or anything, because it's basically a head cold for a kid, for anybody, basically. If you're pretty much healthy, you're not going to die from Omicron. This is going to end the pandemic because everybody's going to get it, and then you're going to get immunity, and then the pandemic can pretty much end. And you laughing at me is pretty rude. You're laughing. I heard you laughing. You're laughing. You're being rude. That is rude, and you are a doctor. You should know better than to be rude. So Omicron is not something to shut our schools down. CDC said masks don't work. I don't know what your game plan is. I don't know what you're going to be voting on. I don't know what you're going to be talking about. That's the bad thing about trying to come up here and talk before you guys talk, because I'd like to know what your thoughts were. But I had to say what I had to say because we had to speak first. But if you're going to close down our schools, there's plenty of studies out there that showed that closing down the schools was absolutely horrible for our kids. That is not the right thing to do. So if you're going to close down our schools, you're going to be taking away and stealing their education. You're going to be making life living hell for all of the parents in the Antigo. And you're probably going to lose a lot of kids because there's other districts that aren't pulling the crap you guys are. And so we might just enter our kids in a different school district, and then they might actually get a better education because they won't be getting CRT training, so then they'll actually get a real education with academics, and then they might not come back. So you might lose them for good. Is that going to be good for Antigo? No, it's not. And you're going to slap masks back on them? Okay, go for it, I guess. You've already done it, but then you're not listening to the CDC because they said last week it don't work. So I don't know what this emergency meeting is about when there's not an emergency going on right now. It's kind of foolish. You're making yourself look foolish. There's nothing anybody can do. Everybody's going to get this Omicron variant, and there's not a damn thing anybody in this country can do about it. It's extremely contagious, but it's very mild as long as you're a typically healthy person otherwise. So I don't know what your plan is, but it's ridiculous.
Okay. Thank you. I just have one question. Dr. Deep, is there anybody in the hospital that with COVID now? And are those Delta cases or just bad head colds?
No, these are confirmed COVID cases.
But do we know if they're Delta or Omicron?
The vast majority are Omicron in this
They
group.
suspect they are. We do not get the feedback from the State Department of Health Services.
So we could be dealing with either one yet?
Yes.
Okay.
But according to the last week's state, we were at over 80% of cases were Omicron variants.
Oh,
Can't hear back here. Can't hear us.
The last time that I heard from the State Department of Health Services, over 80% of the cases were the Omicron variant in the state.
this is cases in the hospital or?
the number of cases that were detected.
It's about 80%. Okay, so we'll go on to the update.
Okay, so we all have access to the COVID dashboard. It's on our website. And the reason for the meeting was simply because we have not, since the start of the pandemic, experienced a spike like this. And I really am unable to predict if there will be outcomes from tonight's meeting. So we had agreed upon as a board at one time to use that verbiage in case there should be a motion. So that's why it's posted as such. But it is noteworthy that right now we have hit over 4% active cases. If you recall, back at the start of the school year in September, we were using a metric. I believe Mr. Schrader offered it, and then we went back and forth a little bit, but eventually settled on wearing masks should we hit 2% active cases. And then we moved away from it, but at the time, if you remember and watch the dashboard, we were barely hitting even 0.5%. So that is the reason for the meeting, is just to make sure, namely, that the board and our public is aware of the active cases and what that means for staffing. So uploaded today, because I just returned to the office today, you will see an attachment, student and staff attendance data. And I numbered the pages longhand in case we needed quick reference, but I'm actually more concerned from my position about the number of staff absences than I am about students. I agree, of course, about everyone's well-being, but nobody, and I would gather or wage that the board feels the same, nobody is hoping we close the school. Nobody. In fact, last time we had a meeting such as this, that was the one thing we all agreed on, is how important in-person instruction is. But what I want to point out to the board and just make sure they are aware, and then subsequently our families, is that right now, I think our staff is doing an amazing job covering for each other. The board received an email late today from a teacher that really just gave a personal yet professional account of what it's like when you don't have enough subs to cover. So we have combined classrooms. We have teachers for weeks on end who are not getting any kind of prep period because they're covering for a colleague. I'm so proud of the selfless nature of our staff, but it's taking its toll, and I just want everyone to know that. Today I met with the entire admin team, and we talked about the threshold at which we simply could not operate. Nobody in that meeting offered a number or a scenario because they want to keep forging ahead, knowing that their staff will continue giving. And like I said, I'm very proud of our staff for that, but we have to be realistic. There could come a time in the next few weeks, I imagine, that we simply cannot run a building. It wouldn't be the whole district that would close, but we would want to give notice, especially if we have staff positives, and then they're going to be out for the next number of days. We would want to give our families as much notice as possible. So I'm prepared to make that decision as a last resort. But to bring your attention back to the attachments, last week, that's page 1, you see that we had a total of 135 over that, but staff absences. By way of comparison, if you look the week we returned from winter break, we had 84.5. So I just wanted to give you a comparison that this is more staff staff absences than we've experienced in my tenure here. We just signed up another sub 2 weeks ago. We are always looking to boost our substitute teaching core. But just today, and these numbers appear in longhand on page 1, we had 35 staff out. 14, when they put the absence in, indicated that they did not need a sub. So that would be a position, well, like myself, if I were absent, or principals don't get subs, usually secretaries do not. Aides we try, but often they cannot. So 14 indicated no sub needed. 10 positions of those 35 we were able to fill, and then 11 remained unfilled. And that's where staff get really creative in covering for each other. So then when you look at the subsequent pages in there, and it talks about the number of student absences, you have all of last week, and I've marked the dates there for you, and they're not good, but they're also not to the point where I would suggest that we, move to remote learning. Not at all. Some of our schools are hovering right around 80% attendance rate. So that's why I say, if we are looking at a closure, a temporary closure, it wouldn't be because of student attendance. It would definitely be because of staff absences. So those were the updates I wanted to provide, and then also just to let you know what transpired at the meeting today. I already mentioned that nobody is hoping for a school closure. In fact, when we talked about it, one of the comments was, should we look at a schedule like we had last year, whereby we give a day for our staff to kind of catch up, work with all the students who had been absent that week, and prepare for remote lessons. But even that wasn't met with 100% agreement, because we just want our students in person. So that being said, I would ask the board to support us if you can. And I already stated one of those pieces would be at my discretion to close if necessary. I would hate to have to wait for another board meeting to make that decision. And again, it would be as temporary as possible. But then secondarily, I would ask the board to consider revisiting a temporary mask mandate, simply based on that 2% metric that you agreed to, or the majority agreed to at one time. But I would say that we shouldn't look at it by district. The principals pointed that out to me. It should be by building. West has been for quite a while and remains our lowest rate of incidence at that school. So it's very different than the other district buildings, and central office is included in there. You can see we have the highest rate right now. So I would suggest we revisit that language of masking if we're at or above 2% until that building is back to 1%. And I know masking is not perfect. I fully understand that. I traveled, that's why I am masked. That's part of the reason. The other reason is because of all the positive cases. But I know it's not foolproof, but if it helps us keep our staff and students in school, even a handful of them, I do think it's worth it temporarily.
So there's 35 staff absences. The COVID dashboard shows 21 active staff cases. Is that correct?
35 absent today. If you look, Jill, the other reasons are listed on page 1.
Yeah, it's just
So
someone might have to stay home with their child.
Right. So sick leave is just one of the categories listed there, and you see that of the 135, almost 116 were sick leave. But that does not mean certainly that they're positive. They could be sick with something else or take a sick day for a sick child.
So it's not necessarily they're home positive with COVID.
Right.
Okay.
You know, when you talk about the teacher, is this on? When you talk about the teachers covering for each other, that is the quickest way to cause burnout. If they're not getting, and when you talk about a prep time, I'm sure some people think, oh, you know, what are they going to do on their prep time? Well, take a breath. The first thing, you sit down, you're by yourself. You know, we were always covering for each other if something came up. But when I went into a 4K room, I was of no use in a 4K. All I could really do was read, tie shoes, blow noses. You know, I mean, and I couldn't go into a 5th grade classroom and teach math without a review. And so you might have a body in there, but how much are the kids getting out of that person being in there? You know, it's that's what my concern is. Not even for whatever reason they're out. The teachers are out, and we need to be able to cover those classrooms.
That's a good point, Mary. I neglected to say that, again, as proud as I am for everyone covering for each other, and it happens every day, all day, it isn't likely that we'll increase student achievement doing this. But you know that, and I know that. That's just a tough reality right now. And until we can have some semblance of normalcy, I'm afraid we're not going to raise.
We are. So what are we looking? We're looking at, if necessary, closing a building or
Yes.
two. Now, I noticed some districts were doing that where they had high numbers.
Yes,
And you know, we're not the only district with staffing issues. It's all over.
right.
You know, they're not really even talking about the kids right now. They're talking about how the inability to effectively staff a building. And so are we looking to decide that's how we'll move forward?
Well, I simply wanted the board to be aware that that could be on the horizon, and you would know as soon as I make that decision, that's where we're headed and for how long. But it's more of an awareness than anything, Mary.
Just before the meeting, I went on my Facebook, I know it's not real news. A friend of mine is a teacher at St. Croix Falls, and they just announced today that they're going virtual for the rest of this week, starting tomorrow, because of staffing. They don't have subs, they don't have teachers, so they have no choice of going virtual for the rest of this week. One of my concerns is the staff. I've talked to several teachers, secretaries, and they're fried, they're burned out. They're pretty much at the end of the rope. They're doing a wonderful job, and God bless them, but how long can they keep this up? And I think that's...
And it's only January 17th.
Yeah.
And they're already at that point.
Yeah, and they've been this way since
Yes.
September, October. One thing I think we could do to eliminate some of the pressure, we have a couple of in-service days coming up, one a month. Instead of having a program, something that teachers have to attend, why don't we just give them that day to work in our classrooms? Just catch their breath, catch up on paperwork,
No meetings.
decompress, no meetings. I think that would go a long way to at least a temporary fix, but that's one thing. But I think we have to do something to figure out how to support the teachers and the staff, because if they're at their wits' end, the kids are really going to suffer.
Dr. Sprague, if you go to this virtual for whatever, explain this to me, who's going to do that though? If you already are short on the teachers, how are you going to handle already don't have enough bodies to do the in-person teaching. So this be the teacher who's sick or out at home, that they will be able to staff remotely?
Well, we've been working with staff, and certainly we have a long way to go, but the board approved the purchase of Canvas, so they already know to have a lesson uploaded should we have an inclement weather day. So we also revisited the document that we drafted this fall, should we have a school closure. So after tonight's meeting, based on any outcomes, I would, share that again as a reminder. The rigor is not the same, obviously, but there are ways that objectives can be uploaded, assignments can be uploaded, so that a teacher doesn't have to be online that entire 8 hours, but rather back and forth, checking in.
But the school district is set up that they'll be able to do that at short notice then?
Yes. It won't be perfect, but yes.
Okay,
Second thing,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I have a couple more questions.
Okay.
Second question, how much notice are you planning on giving if you decide to close down a building? Is it a 24-hour notice? Is it 48 hours? Or?
It would have to be at least 24. What I envision, never having done this before, is, let's say, and I'll use North Elementary as just an example. Let's say that today they had 3 doubled up classes, but we find out this evening that another teacher tests positive. So I would speak personally with Donna Smith, how is that looking? Is there a way to cover tomorrow? I wouldn't want to notify parents tonight, if at all possible. I'd rather have kids come in so they can gather their materials and then send them as best prepared as we can at the end of the day tomorrow.
Third question, if you decide to close down a building, how long do you propose to do that? Are you looking at, supposing the teachers are out with an infection, then it's whatever 5 days that they're out. Is that what you're looking at when you send that information over to the parents? Or is it'll be tough to go day by day and say, we'll just do a couple days then?
I wouldn't want to go day by day just for planning purposes, but I certainly wouldn't want to go longer than 5 days either. And hopefully during that time we would have enough staff back that we could continue covering for each other.
Okay.
How many staff are out due to close contact?
I don't have that information, but since the board approved that asymptomatic close contacts don't have to be out, I know it's not nearly as many as it used to be. There are some, I know of some at an elementary school I learned of, who were close contacts through family, and so the health department worked with those folks.
The health department recommended
That they quarantine.
recommended quarantine or
Right.
enforced some sort of.
Well, as you know, they can't enforce it, and they actually told our employees that. We have at least one who is coming back to work and not following that recommendation. So it's really the employee's decision.
So what factor does that play? Oh, you don't have the numbers, sorry. I guess I'm just trying to better understand the numbers and what, I know there's a shortage, I mean, and I think you said it, Mary, it's not specific to USDA.
Right.
So I'm just trying to better understand the extent of the shortage, to what extent it's due to COVID, close contact, recommendation to stay home, plan vacations, because that'll fluctuate then.
Yeah.
In terms of who's out this week versus next week, and how do you game plan and support staff? Just trying to better understand the numbers.
May I answer your question? We have just 2 staff members who are out. One is in IA, one of them is maintenance. They are out as directed by public health. Otherwise, all the other staff that are out are either positive or symptomatic. I have not quarantined anybody else. There have been no school contacts been quarantined by me. The only people who do quarantine at home are the ones that are quarantined by public health because they are household contacts, and we only have 2 staff members at this time. And as Dr. Sprague said, one of them is coming back tomorrow.
So
The other one is home for childcare.
those with symptoms would be electing to stay home?
Those with symptoms should stay home, because if they're not gonna get tested, they could very well have the virus. If they get tested, we've had several instances where they get tested, they're negative, their symptoms continue, I retest in 2 days and they're positive. If they get 2 negative antigen tests, they can come back once their symptoms are greatly improved. But if they're sick, we encourage them to stay home because we don't want, and if they're with kids, you don't want them to have to be in a classroom sick.
But I'll be honest, not all are
Not all
students
are.
or staff. And
Exactly.
that's tough, but that's a reality. We have people coming
Yeah.
to school and work already sick.
Exactly. They're opting to stay home because they're ill. But we do have a lot of dedicated staff who are coming to school sick.
Back before the pandemic.
Yeah.
In the olden days, we all went to school sick because
Yes.
going to school, even if you didn't feel good, was easier than prepping for a sub, which takes me back to having subs. I know there aren't many on the list to start with. It's a thankless job. And when you can't find a sub, or, you know, there's certain subs that will only go to certain buildings, or they don't want to be with the older kids, or they would prefer, you know, early primary. And so you can't, just because somebody's on the sub list doesn't mean that they are going to go into high school physics. And so that, you know, it just is what it is. And, you know, we used to have a sub list that was loaded. And now, you know, retired staff used to right away get on the sub list. I don't know nobody that I worked with is on the sub list. But I want to quick run back to what Wayne said about giving freeing up some time. Dr. Sprague, are the in-service days required X number of in-service days for the year? I mean, like, let's say, I know this Friday is a records day, and that is a work day, although I've heard from people that are not happy that meetings are scheduled on that day. That is records day, that should be a work day, no meetings. Really.
I only know of one, a luncheon for new staff and their mentors where
Well,
lunch is provided.
A lunch would be great.
But I will check on that.
Yeah, but if they don't have to have a certain number of in-service days, it would be really nice if we could offer something to ease the burden. I mean, it's a burden. And I think we need to start looking out for the staff. You know, we're always questioned, how come we can't keep anybody here? Well, they're meeting to death every day. There's meetings, and then they last till 5 o'clock or 5:30 on a Friday night. You know, I mean, it's like, we used to have 2 meetings a month, and it was hard to do. And I just think that we need to start looking out for the staff. And this is where we, you know, I mean, here we are, they're sick now. And maybe not all, you know, with COVID, but you just get worn out.
Burned out. Dr. Sprague, when I first got on the board a year and a half ago, COVID started, there was something that the state waived, some obligation that, could you refresh my memory, what was that?
There were a few. One was the evaluative system
Right.
for staff and principals, and we opted not to. I think that's the one you're talking about.
Correct.
And that was simply based on, not simply, because it's a complex system, but based on how our students were achieving, we felt strongly that since we are, you know, working for the district, we should strive for continuous improvement. But we did lessen the rigor of the requirements.
I think if there's anything else to do to eliminate some of this extra workload on the teachers. Like Mary said, they're meeting to death. There's endless paperwork, and I get it. We're professionals. Teachers are professionals. But I think there's a time when you have to just kind of cut back a little and let them do the job they know how to do, because they do know how to do it. There are some teachers, in any profession, you have people who are going to be slackers. But I think in this day and age, I think we need to take care of the teachers, because we've already lost several, and I've heard talk, people want to make this a destination district, bring teachers in, and we have to figure out how to retain the ones we have. And I think by taking some of the workload off of them, let them do the job they know how to do. I think that would go a long way.
Oh, all right. So I'm a little out of the loop on, I haven't followed up in the last few meetings, but we are, I don't know, however many months into COVID.
2
and
years.
we're still talking about what we should be doing, but I feel that our district needs to put a plan into place that says, and it shouldn't just be COVID, it should be infectious disease, okay? Because how many kids are out with colds or flu or anything? And it's just hitting everybody right now, but I think to avoid, to keep meeting like this, that we need the district to put together a plan, bring it to the school board, and for review and approval. And it's just like other districts where it's, this is what happens at this school, and this is what happens district-wide, and do it that way, instead of having meeting after meeting about what should we do.
But then, when the board decides something, it needs to have follow-through. It needs to be enforced in every building. When we did the mask mandate until December 23rd, it was not enforced. And and all I could think of was, nobody wants to wear a mask. I get it. I don't want to wear a mask. But how many hours we put in hashing this out, I mean, that's all we've done. And then we set something in place and there's no follow-through. So it's sort of like, and then there was no consequence. Some of the buildings just did whatever they wanted to. So then why are we, beating a dead horse?
I just think I visited several of the schools in the last month, and I'm going to say West for an example. You go there, most of the staff is wearing a mask. When I talked to them, they didn't have problems getting kids to wear a mask, and their numbers are low. They do some other things too that I think are helping. I've been to the high school, and like you said, the kids didn't wear masks. The staff was, I'd say 95% or more of the staff was wearing a mask. And so if we're going to institute something that says, when we hit 5%, school has to mask up. Well, at the high school, I just don't see it happening. And at the same token, a school like West, well, if they're having success, or even think they're having success with masking, why not have them mask up and at least have some success somewhere?
Yeah.
Kind of follow up on what Angel was saying. The district could come up with a plan, but I think in order to do that, I think they need to get feedback from teachers. Because whatever the
Not just
district,
an administrative group.
right, whatever the district comes up with, the teachers are the ones who are going to do the heavy lifting. They're the ones who are going to have to follow through on it and do the dirty work. So I think you need input from the teachers. They're the ones that are there all day, every day doing the work.
Okay.
I guess I have two somewhat random comments. In the Milwaukee Journal last week, Ashwaubenon school districts, the school board voted students need to wear masks at the 10-day positivity rate reaches or goes over 2.5% at a school. So I thought that was interesting, someone else doing something similar to us. The state Supreme Court right now, I don't know if it reached oral argument yet, but Dane County versus the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, it's to the same question that we often talk about. The Dane County Board is allowing their public health officer to enforce quarantine and rules without a county ordinance, and they believe that's the way it's allowed, and Will says it's not. So it's, at some point, I have no idea when, there will be a decision on that. Obviously, Langley County is taking a different position. So, I don't know if somebody wants to make a motion.
I mean, we had masking last year, and we had a COVID spike in late October, November, with masking district-wide. We have a spike this year. Masking is not required. Masking continues to be a discussion topic, with KN95s at minimum being the recommended type of mask to wear, and that's for adults. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Deep or Dr. McKenna, but I mean, masking is not, is arguably not an effective way to stop transmission. So I struggle, I continue to struggle, my thoughts haven't changed on masking, that it impacts successful outcomes, it impacts student learning, it impacts the ability for kids to be able to read, hear, learn, listen. Nonverbals are so important, and I just absolutely do not support masking, especially at the younger level. And that doesn't take into account the mental health impacts of masking. I mean, for example, today my daughter said, "Mommy, I smiled at a girl today because she looked sad and I thought she needed a smile." That can't happen with masks on. She's like, my daughter's a kindergartner. So like, those are the things that are really important. Aside from the efficacy concerns of masking and what does it do to prevent anything or much. So that's my feedback on masking.
Can we get N95 masks for kids?
Are you freaking kidding me? Stop. Are you kidding me? Seriously.
I'd like to ask Dr. McKenna or Dr. Deep, are masks, do masks help, and how severe is Omicron?
It's that cold.
Excuse me, we sat up here and listened to you respectfully. Can you please do the same? You want us to take you serious because something you're passionate about, and we sat and we listened. So please do the same or walk outside and watch it on YouTube.
Everything you're saying is serious. It's hard to take it seriously. There's no common sense here.
We did
Dr.
not
McKenna,
comment when you
you're
were
up.
speaking.
Fine, I'll shut up.
Well, right now the hospital is as full and as close to being near its breaking point as it's been in 2 years in terms of hospitalizations. The ER has about 8 or 9 people boarded typically on average the past week, and there's nowhere for people who are severely ill sometimes to go in this state. So we're talking about a very severe situation.
Are these Omicron cases?
We cannot
As-
comment on Omicron or not.
Yeah.
All we do is we test for the COVID. That serotyping or the genotyping of that is done in Madison, but they never get back to us by saying what that variant is, whether it's the Delta or Omicron.
But it is
It's a-
COVID.
It
But
is COVID,
it
that's
is
all we
COVID.
can tell you.
And you could, I mean, as Dr. Deep said, in the general testing, Omicron accounts for about 80% of the cases at this point in America. There might be variations in different areas. I've taken care, I took care of a woman whose daughter was 35 and died, from whatever variant it was, in the past week. And it's, so it takes people who are even healthy, and it affects people who are even healthy. And unfortunately, we also live in a country where 60% of people have at least one chronic illness. So it's a situation where it affects a lot of people.
When you talk hospitalizations, are you talking hospitalized because of COVID or hospitalized and
They are
tested?
hospitalized because of COVID. When they come in with symptoms that are attributed to the COVID.
Okay,
We do not just test somebody if they come in for heart failure and say you are COVID positive, so we are admitting you.
correct.
The reason that people are tested when they are being admitted is to make sure that they are placed in the appropriate rooms with a negative airflow so that you keep the staff and the other people safe.
Absolutely.
That's the only reason, but when we talk about COVID cases, we are talking about patients who are admitted to this hospital with symptoms that are purely caused by COVID. This has nothing to do with their positive status when they're being admitted for something else.
Okay, thank you. Has data changed from South Africa? I think the last I read, Dr. McKenna, was like 80% decrease in hospitalizations with Omicron.
So I think we live in the United States, Joe, and I think you want to look at what's relevant here. And if you look here, our hospitals are, they're really full everywhere in the state. We cannot transfer people with severe illness because the hospitals are completely full. And that doesn't matter if you're a pediatric patient who has a tonsillar abscess. Hospitals are very full. And if you're sick for any reason, it is a very bad time to go to the hospital and be in the hospital.
I appreciate the reminder that I live in America, Dr. McKenna. I just simply sharing as a positive, actually, of it's highly contagious, yet has presented with less catastrophic outcomes. So as a positive with Omicron versus Delta and other variants, and of course everything is always new and evolving. So it's helpful to utilize data that is available. So I was hoping for that to be a positive. Do we have treatments available to patients, either outpatient or inpatient, with COVID?
We're treating people for coronavirus when they come to the hospital with the wide array of medicines that we have learned can be helpful. Sometimes people are still really sick. I think there was also a question about masking. I'd just like to double back to that and just note that masking is not perfect. I would certainly say vaccination actually is highly beneficial, but if the cat's out of the bag, then certainly masking is a reasonable thing and a reasonable measure to try. If you would like to, perhaps keep schools open, I think it's a reasonable thing to consider. Of course, you are the board, and you're certainly welcome to take that under advisement.
So if it came to it, do we have to give you approval to close the school? A school, or how does that work?
I would hope not. I would
Okay.
think that would be under my
The way I
So,
understood
purview.
you to say is that basically you want the board to give you the authority to close at your discretion when you are at a critical level with regarding to staffing or the number of cases.
correct.
Dr. McKenna, back to you. I think what Jill might have been alluding to was I've heard that in certain areas, I think some major cities, New York was one that I heard, they've already peaked and the cases are coming down. Have you heard any information on that?
It's a really good question. I have spent a lot of time thinking that there would be peaks and troughs, and I think we are all made fools of when we try to definitively decide. And I'm speaking actually of myself. I really didn't think we'd be dealing with this at this point. I thought things would quiet down after the Delta variant. At some point, pandemics do recede and become endemic, as someone noted. We are most definitely not at that time. My hope is that things will quiet down, but I don't know when that is. Certainly here in Antigo, the hospital and the amount of things that we're dealing with are pretty high so far right now.
I think it's a possibility that some of the other areas, the geographical regions, probably were also the ones to be hit early. If you go back and look over the last 2 years, we did not have any cases initially until the end of May 2020, when in March the east and west coasts were hammered pretty bad by the virus. So we did well through the summer of 2020. It was in that late fall, October, November was when we started seeing those cases come in our county. So it's a possibility that, you know, what the trends that you are seeing that Wayne just referenced, you probably will not see the downward trend here for a couple, 3 months because we are behind the times. We started seeing the cases later than the others. We saw the peaks come through a little later than other geographical areas in the country. So it's a possibility, you know, and every single morning I wake up with hoping that maybe this will be the end of it. You know, nobody thought that you'd see a second Christmas. We all threw away our Christmas masks in summer of 2021, but again came back to the same thing. So, you know, we are learning. This is science in action. I think, you know, we are just seeing the evolution as things are going on, and with the advent of electronic media and everything, you're able to firsthand see these things. These were things, if you go back and look 100 years ago, people did not know about smallpox and polio and all these things because you did not have this rapid dissemination of information. So it's both a blessing and it's also a curse when, you know, some of the information that is being spread can sometimes be negative. So we just need to make sure that we're looking at it objectively, use the data to come up with a decision that can keep our schools open, that can keep our kids safe. You know, I've said this before, my reason for requiring masking was to make sure that we did not quarantine the kids could get the education they deserve. Kids who come from impoverished families can have that access to the nutrition that they need. These are things that we need to think about. This is not about, you know, my personal feelings about a mask or not. I do not impose it on somebody, but at the same time also we have a responsibility to our students, to our families. So what is the way here that we can deal with this? Can we get together and come up with a resolution that will help us keep our schools open, that can provide that education for our students? And you got to think about the families. When we close those schools down or when you go virtual, you are also putting an extra stress on those blue-collar workers in this community. How are they going to afford? Do they have access to the computers, to the Wi-Fi and everything else? These are all things that we need to look at.
I also think we put a lot of stress on ourselves to keep students safe and routinely forget to identify that we trust parents and guardians to keep their children safe and make decisions for their children and their children's best interests too.
Okay, why don't we, somebody get some words together and make a motion about this school closing thing. You know, if it needs to be, they can't staff the buildings or the numbers go out of control, but really, I'm thinking staffing in my head. And Dr. Spring needs to make a decision. I think that's what we were looking at, isn't it? So let's do that.
Do we even need a motion for her to be able to do that though?
No, I don't think
She just
so.
already
Okay, then are we all in agreement? That
Do we want to have a discussion so that our community might have an idea of what that would look like and help support you, Julie, if you have to make that decision? I mean, I'm not necessarily saying a vote, but like I still feel like it's pretty, I'm a parent and right now. I'm like, well, I don't know when or if or what to look for or any indicators of it, you know.
Because I mean, we could make up a number of students and staff having coronavirus, but the hard part is how do we make a specific enough motion that says all of a sudden you don't have enough teachers? You know, she'll know when she doesn't have enough teachers, but how do we possibly put that in a motion?
And you know, I don't think we should look at the number of students that would test positive. I think we need to right now focus on the staff because you cannot, and I know that it's hard for parents, but you know, I think sometimes we think, okay, they're going to school, and we all know why they're going to school, but do you realize, I mean, can you understand that there may be a custodian teaching that day who is not prepared to go into, I mean, they have to be there and it has to be constructive. And if we can't provide a constructive educational setting for them, then I can't see, I mean, there needs to be,
and it would be hard to put a number on it because every building has a different number of staff.
But Mary, I think the bottom line here is, do we want to trust Dr. Sprague and the principals at the school to make that decision?
Yes,
And if we can simply say, yes, we do,
yes,
then
we
I
do.
don't know that we need a motion or we need to discuss this more. Please, if somebody wants to say, no, I don't want to trust administration, then we can make it into some kind of motion.
Andy, I completely agree. I don't think it is the role of the board to look at micromanagement of the school, every school.
Correct.
Okay, you put the administration in place for a reason. You give them direction, they should be making those decisions. That's what they're paid for. Okay, you need to entrust them, you need to put the right people in the right position and let them make those decisions. You cannot be contacted every single day, and she can't wait to get an email or a phone call back from 9 board members and then make that decision. So I think we need to trust them. They know their staffing needs. They can come up with a protocol where they can say, this is our threshold. At this point, we cannot do anything more. We need to go.
Yeah.
And I would trust the teacher, the principals, and the administrator with that decision.
We have to trust them as professionals.
Absolutely.
I wasn't offering a recommendation for a motion
No,
on
I'm
that.
saying,
I was
I
offering,
don't want to
I
go
just
with
wanted
a
to
number. I don't want
clarify.
to go with a number of sick people or not. I think it's whenever they have, or they can justify a critical staff below which they cannot function in person, they should be able to make that decision and try to keep it to no more than 5 days, as Dr. Sprague suggested.
That's more what I was looking at, you know, could be, and it doesn't sound like maybe this is a discussion and Julie, you can just make those decisions. I was more along the lines of we'd ideally like to see a 48-hour notice for families. You know, if at all possible, that's what you'd strive for, and no longer than 5 days, not set in stone, but like this is what ideally what we'd like to see happen. Because again, I'm a parent too, and I'm a board member. And I felt like that was just really unclear of like, so do I expect to shut down in the next 24 hours or what? So that's where I was going with it. Is I didn't know if you.
I will capture the discussion from tonight in a communication to our families tomorrow and go over some of that.
Okay,
Thank you.
and then the second thing here tonight would be masking. And
The question is about the masking. You can put it on paper that you're requiring it, but if you are not following it in the schools, what purpose is it?
I really am going to go back to, and maybe I should just make a motion that we have Dr. Sprague create a plan, and then these things are in place. It could be, well, 5% at West Elementary with COVID or any sickness that is highly contagious, then they mask. So maybe that's just what I should have. I need a motion for that, right? Or can you just work on it
you
and
can
present
direct
it?
her to come up with a plan without a motion. The board can do that, and you as an individual board member
Do
can
we
request
have to vote on it?
that happens. No, we don't need to vote on her
So I
coming
have
up
to
with a plan.
request it?
But if we want to come up with a number tonight, that would be a motion.
A number,
Dr. Sprague, I'm just going to ask,
A number for what?
a number of what? The percentage of
if
that.
you
We already
wanna
had a
say-
percentage.
Didn't we have a,
It got thrown out
it
when we
expired?
voted it over.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Well, we've
Okay.
talked about staff this entire time, so a number, we're talking about masking students, but our context of our conversation at this point has been about staffing.
Or are we asking?
You could do
if
any
we should mask
combination.
staff?
So if we said, we want to have masking at elementary schools for everybody, but at the high school, we only want staff to mask, because realistically, that's all that would happen. We could do that, but do we want to make that motion tonight, or do we want administration to do a little more thought on this and come back with a plan for next week?
Or maybe we allow parents to make that decision for their children.
Are you saying survey each school and see if they want what the majority want?
I'm saying let parents and guardians decide what's best for their children.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Do you want to survey each school and see what?
I don't think she wants to survey, she just wants
I don't
the
want more,
parents
I don't
to
want
make
more.
their own, wants them to make up their own mind. So you
Okay.
mean if they wanted their child to wear a mask, the child would wear a mask?
Okay. Well, what does anybody else feel here?
The whole point is that, you know, if you require masks, but if they're not going to wear them, what purpose?
What's the use? Right. And I'd like to remind us that with the last time the mask mandate, temporary mask mandate, was to keep kids in school while quarantining. And it seemed counterproductive then to, let's say, suspend a child from school for not wearing a mask because the means did not work then. In that case, it was something we didn't predict accurately would happen because all kids and staff wore masks last year without major issue. So it was a very distinct turn that happened at the high school. But I think it's, you know, they pay attention to what's going on too, and people genuinely can be polarized when it comes to wearing a mask. So I think our students are no exception.
I think we can see it as a benefit too. I think we can see high school students that are advocating for their individual needs and making decisions for their learning. So I mean, I don't think it always has to be in a negative kind of context either, that students can share what they feel is best for them.
But they should also follow expectations and rules of the school.
Sure.
I mean, if you don't teach kids that, then what?
I'm not disagreeing, I'm simply trying to throw out some positivity in a discussion, because little kids aren't going to hear it all the time. Little kids aren't going to tell you that they're getting a headache or concentration or their belly hurts because when they're wearing a mask, because we teach children to respect authority. They don't have the autonomy, they don't have the ability to advocate for themselves in the same capacity, so of course their compliance is going to be higher. We've said that, but no, I just trying to see things in maybe a shifting perspective in the way in which we look to see how could we see this as a positive too as well.
Dr. D, how do you feel about no mask or mask recommended at the high school, but if any other building exceeds 5% mask, too high to even do anything?
Doesn't matter.
No. If you do it, you do it for all the students.
Because the high school is 5.8% now, when nobody else is above 5%.
Yeah. Problem is, if you make the rule, then do it for everybody. Let them follow it. But if you don't, then, you can put it on paper. But if people are not following the rules, if parents do not want their kids to follow them, there's not much you can do. You will continue to see this happen, and that's the downside.
We had a brief discussion about should the board vote to bring masks back, and then we had students not choose to wear them. Could we ask that they be remote learners? But that burden then falls on the teacher having to do double duty. It's already tough enough without having a certain section at home then consistently, so we didn't think that was a good option.
It's also a big distraction too, right? Because look, we're talking about the events and masking and policing, and at this level it's this, but at the elementary it's this. So it's a lot of distraction away from academics specifically and learning loss, and how do we make up the gaps from the learning loss. So
I mean, so we were talking about teachers, and really not getting other people sick is keeping them away from each other. So I don't really think masking is the answer, although I do have my children wear them. But
that's for personal reasons, but keeping people away from each other when they're sick and people staying home, and I know not all parents can do that. It's not, people have to work and it happens, so, yes, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, well, I don't hear any motion coming forward, and
Okay, so what I'll do is capture the discussion points tonight, remind families and staff that masks are recommended. I'd like to say highly recommended, as I have in the past. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And
I think you can just mention that, with the rising number of cases, we encourage them to wear them more regularly during close contact in the schools, at least until the numbers improve.
And so I will send that communication out at the end of the day tomorrow.
Julie, please include that it's still the parents' decision, even though you're gonna write highly recommend, I heard that, it's still their decision. What's best, what they feel is best for their child.
Okay.
okay. Good, I think we are done.
We are?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Could I have a few more ayes?
Oh, sorry. And with more enthusiasm.